The sun was slowly setting over the horizon, tinting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The nature reserve, a vast wildlife sanctuary, was shrouded in shadow as day gave way to night. Workers at the reserve were finishing their daily chores, exhausted but satisfied with their day's work. Some were checking the fences, others were taking notes in their notebooks, and a small group was loading supplies into vehicles for the next day. One of the more experienced caretakers stretched with a sigh. He looked around, making sure everything was in order before retiring. It was at that moment that he noticed something was wrong. In the distance, the lions of the reserve were resting under the shade of the trees, but there was one notable absence. Lenny was not with them. The workers looked at each other, searching for any sign of the young lion. No one had seen him for hours. Lenny was known for his restless spirit, a young lion with an insatiable curiosity that often got him into trouble. Unlike the other lions in the pride, who preferred to sleep most of the day, Lenny was always looking for something to entertain himself. Some workers suggested that perhaps he had just wandered off for a bit, but his prolonged absence was unusual. With the sun descending rapidly, they decided to organize a search before darkness completely covered the savannah. They knew that, although the reserve was a safe place for lions, there were still dangers, especially if Lenny was alone. Meanwhile, Lenny had been walking in circles for hours. He had wandered without noticing, his attention caught by every sound and every movement in the undergrowth. He chased insects, watched antelope from a distance, and fiddled with some feathers he found on the ground. But after a while, he felt lonely. He wanted to play with someone, but the other lions didn't seem interested in his games. It was then that he saw something that caught his attention. A few meters away from him, hanging from a thick branch, was a strange object. He didn't know what it was, but it moved slightly in the breeze and gave off a subtle buzzing sound. Intrigued, Lenny moved closer, craning his neck to get a better look. He had no way of knowing, but what he was seeing was a large bee's nest. The structure hung precariously, and when Lenny leaned against the tree to investigate, the bark slipped under his paws. With a sudden crunch, the nest detached from the branch and fell directly onto his back. The impact took him by surprise. Lenny roared and jumped up and down, jerking in desperation. The nest shattered against his back, releasing a cloud of angry bees that flew in all directions. Some scattered in the night breeze, but many others clustered around the young lion, buzzing aggressively. Lenny felt the first stings and roared in pain. He ran in circles, trying to get away from the chasing cloud, but the bees were persistent. His clawing at the air was useless. In desperation, he began to run at full speed across the savannah, aimlessly, looking for any way to escape the stinging torment. Meanwhile, the workers were advancing with flashlights in hand, following trails in the dirt. Suddenly, a roar echoed in the distance, followed by the sound of snapping branches and the stamping of paws in the undergrowth. Without hesitation, they hurried in the direction of the noise, worried about what they might find ahead. When they finally sighted Lenny, the gravity of the situation became apparent. The young lion was still running desperately, covered by a swarm of bees that were relentlessly attacking him. The workers looked at each other urgently, knowing they could not waste any time. The stings from so many bees could be lethal, even for a strong lion like Lenny. They quickly made their way to the vehicle, where specialized emergency equipment was stored. They pulled out protective beekeeping suits, adjusting their hoods and gloves with precision. They knew that every second counted. Armed with smoke sprays designed to calm the bees, they ran to the lion, ready to help him before it was too late. The rescue operation had to be executed with precision. They divided into 3 groups. The first would surround Lenny and spray smoke around him to disperse the bees. The second would strategically position themselves to assess the lion's condition and act in case he needed immediate medical attention. The third would remain in the vehicle, with additional supplies and radio communication to coordinate any other necessary actions. The first group advanced cautiously, moving in a circle around Lenny. With calculated movements, they turned on the smoke sprays and began to release dense clouds around them. Gradually the effect took hold. The bees, disoriented and dazed by the smoke, began to disperse, moving away from their prey. Lenny, still shaken, and his body aching from the stings, staggered and fell on his side, panting. The second group immediately sprang into action. They approached carefully, checking his vital signs. Despite obvious exhaustion, his breathing remained steady. They proceeded to apply soothing ointment to the most affected areas and moisturize his skin with cold compresses. Meanwhile, the third group monitored the situation from the vehicle. ready to intervene in case it was necessary to transfer the lion to a veterinary clinic. One of the workers picked up the radio and notified the reserve's central team about Lenny's condition, assuring them that the situation was under control. The process took several minutes, but by the end, most of the bees were gone. Lenny, although still weak, was beginning to recover. The workers stayed with him, making sure he was out of danger before deciding on the next steps. Night was falling over the savannah, but the team remained vigilant, keeping an eye on the young lion in the hope that he would soon be able to return to his pride. As the last bees flew away, the workers sighed in relief. They looked at each other with tired smiles, satisfied that they had succeeded in driving the threat away. Some patted each other on the back and allowed themselves a few seconds of celebration. However, the joy quickly faded when they took a closer look at Lenny's condition. Stings covered his body, and although the ointment had helped relieve the burning, some areas looked inflamed. In addition, the effort of running and fighting the swarm had left the lion completely exhausted. Without wasting any more time, the workers got organized again. One of them took out a first aid kit with syringes to administer an anti-inflammatory, while another prepared a saline solution to clean the wounds. With precise movements, they applied the treatment. Lenny, though in pain, barely reacted, too exhausted to resist. They monitored his breathing and temperature, making sure he showed no signs of a severe allergic reaction. Gradually, the lion began to stabilize. Now all that was left was to wait and make sure he could recover enough to return to his pride. For the next 30 minutes, the workers took turns keeping an eye on Lenny. Some monitored his breathing and pulse, while others secured the area to avoid any further danger. Fatigue was evident on their faces, but no one was willing to leave him alone until they were sure he could move on his own. Gradually, the lion began to lift his head and blink more frequently, indicating that he was regaining his strength. Despite their fatigue, the workers knew they still had work to do before the night got too far along. Suddenly, glowing eyes emerged from the undergrowth. A group of hyenas, attracted by the scent of confusion and adrenaline, approached cautiously. Farther back, jackals sniffed in the distance. Lenny, sensing the presence of other animals, stood up with effort and roared fiercely, trying to chase them away. The workers understood that the stress could affect his recovery, so they decided to intervene immediately. They lit flashlights and threw some stones on the ground to scare the intruders away. Seeing the determination of the human group, the predators opted to retreat. With the danger dispersed, the workers organized to carefully load Lenny into the vehicle. Before leaving, they fitted him with a tracker to monitor his condition and prevent him from straying again in the future. With the engine running, the workers loaded Lenny into the vehicle to take him to the mobile rehabilitation center. The vehicle moved cautiously across the savannah, its wheels making furrows in the dusty earth as flashlights dimly illuminated the landscape around them. Lenny, still half disoriented but stable, lay on a makeshift stretcher, carefully positioned in the back of the vehicle. His eyes were blinking slowly, his gaze dulled by fatigue, but something in the air suggested that he had already begun to find some comfort, as if the danger was already behind him. The return trip passed in a silence marked only by the soft murmur of the engine and the crunching of the earth beneath the wheels. The workers remained on alert, their eyes fixed on the young lion, not turning away for a moment. They knew they couldn't relax until they reached the mobile rehabilitation center, and they didn't want to risk an unexpected complication along the way. Maria, the senior caregiver, watched Lenny closely, her mind racing for possible signs of stress or deterioration. Although the lion seemed to be reacting well to treatment, the workers understood that the danger was not completely gone. Every minute that passed was crucial to ensure that there were no life-threatening allergic reactions or infections. Dr. Hernandez, in charge of medical interventions, kept checking the portable monitor next to him. His movements were meticulous and serene, but a subtle concern shone in his eyes. He knew that bee stings could be more dangerous than they appeared at first glance. If the swelling was not properly controlled, or if Lenny suffered some sort of shock, the situation could quickly become complicated. Javier, the animal technician, also maintained a tense posture, glancing in the rearview mirror from time to make sure the lion was holding steady. The calm of the night was deceptive, for the entire team knew that, although everything seemed under control, circumstances could change at any moment. However, as they made their way down the trail to the center, the atmosphere was filled with a certain hopefulness. Lenny had withstood the worst, and seemed to have reached the point where his body was beginning to regain strength. When they finally arrived at the mobile rehabilitation center, the arrival was meticulously planned. The workers wasted no time. Quickly, Lenny was moved to a more advanced stretcher, and Dr. Lara, who had been awaiting his arrival, began to check his condition. With quick, precise movements, she took care to observe each sting, looking for signs of infection or severe allergic reactions. Initial examination revealed that the bee stings, although painful, had not caused major complications. The swelling was considerable, but within tolerable limits for a young lion. The workers breathed a sigh of relief, but knew that this was only the beginning of the recovery process. Still, the early signs were promising. The work to stabilize Lenny continued relentlessly. Intravenous fluids were administered. Topical treatments were applied to the most serious wounds, and he was offered a quiet environment to rest. The lion's fatigue was evident, but the vital energy still residing in him was not lost on the team. It was as if nature itself was struggling to restore the strength he had lost during his harrowing ordeal. As the hours passed, the team alternated in their wakefulness. Some monitored Lenny's vital signs closely, while others made adjustments to treatments, and managed the environment to avoid any additional stress. The night passed slowly, punctuated by the sound of monitors and the faint glow of lamps. With the first dawn of morning, Lenny began to wake up. His breathing was calmer, less agitated, and his eyes, though still somewhat dull, were beginning to show signs of alertness. His body, though exhausted, responded to the stimuli around him, and in his movements there was a hint of the vitality that had characterized this restless young lion. The workers, seeing his condition improve, were reassured. Although Lenny had not fully regained his energy, signs of recovery were evident. The fever had subsided, and the swelling from the bites, though still visible, was beginning to subside. There were no signs of shock, and respiratory function remained stable. Despite the exhaustion that already showed on their own faces, the team allowed the lion to rest in peace for a while, as they continued to monitor his condition. The hours passed slowly but steadily. Lenny continued his recovery process, and with each passing minute, his body seemed to gain more strength. Little by little, he began to move more confidently, and his look no longer reflected only exhaustion, but also the determination that had always been in his character. Although he was still far from full recovery, his progress was clear. As evening fell, Dr. Lara and the rest of the team felt it was time to prepare Lenny to return to the savannah. Recovery had not been quick, but it had been stable enough for the lion to rejoin his pride. Despite the scars that would mark his body for some time to come, his spirit seemed stronger than ever, ready to face the world he knew so well. The return trip was smoother than the first. The road to the savannah was familiar, and the vehicle moved forward more safely. As night began to fall again over the reserve, the workers, though exhausted, felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that their mission had been successful. They had managed to save a young lion, who, despite the challenges, now seemed ready to return to the wild. Arriving at the area where the lion pride was resting, the workers stopped the vehicle and carefully moved Lenny into the field. The lion, still hesitant, but now more alert and curious, began to walk slowly toward his pride. The pride watched him in the distance, and Lenny, with one last effort, took a few more steps, joining them. The return home was silent, but full of meaning. Lenny was welcomed without further ceremony, and although the frailty of his body was still noticeable, his presence in the pride was what really mattered. The lion had finally found his way back to his rightful place. The workers, watching him from afar, breathed a sigh of relief. They knew that their labor had been crucial, but they also knew that ultimately it was Lenny's inner strength that had brought him through this challenge. As they walked away from the herd, a feeling of peace enveloped them. The savannah, with all its challenges and beauty, was still a wild and unpredictable place, but for a moment, nature had been given a second chance. The sun, now almost hidden on the horizon, painted the sky in warm golden hues. Night was beginning to spread across the savannah, as the workers quietly drifted away, aware that the cycle of wildlife continued, ever unpredictable and full of new stories to be written.